You may have noticed that the opening for this episode was slightly different to the last 4 episodes, and also different if you're a returning customer to the channel on a whole. That's because way back when this channel started 2 years ago, I used to only make videos about Zelda. It was Zelda theories, Zelda premonitions about Breath of the Wild and whatnot. And since then, around about November of 2016, I started moving away from just the Zelda content, but also at the same time, for some reason, sabotaged myself by making an opening that was purely just the Gate of Time that I totally rendered myself. Drew every layer of it in sketchables, and that was my kind of, like, branding for a long time. But now that I've moved away from all of that sort of content, I've decided to go with something a little bit more unique, a little bit more UnorigiNik. So that's why you saw that, because I just don't talk about Zelda as much as I'd like to anymore. Anyway, having said that, time to get on with this episode. Have you ever played Zelda? Great game. Nintendo 64, Ocarina of Time, best game I ever played. When are we going to see a Nintendo 64 Mini console? I have a feeling it might be soon. The reason I say that, and I've been mistaken already because I thought it would be announced at E3, but there are a lot of signs pointing to the idea of a Nintendo 64 Mini coming out. The first one is way back in, I think, March. There was a Nintendo trademark for a Nintendo 64 controller icon, which came out along with a NES and a SNES controller. We've seen the NES and the SNES Mini consoles released, but not the Nintendo 64. So a lot of people were speculating at the time that this was evidence that a Nintendo 64 Mini console was on its way. However, those dreams have kind of been dashed because if it was following the same trend as the other two, it should be coming out at the end of this month. We haven't heard of anything like that happening yet, and I think there are several reasons why we haven't. I'll touch on those in a moment. But if we can just go back to the icon, essentially people thought that trademarked icon was going to be for the Nintendo Online services. We know that the Nintendo Online services were data mined earlier. It was last month now. Geez, we're in spring already. Yay, September. However, it revealed several different icons for the Nintendo Online services. You had the NES controller, which makes sense because we've got NES games coming. That's going to be the second subject of this episode, by the way. I'm all over the place at the moment, but that's right, we'll catch up on that. It also has something that looks kind of like the SNES controller. It's lacking that little indentation in the controller that really defines it, but it kind of looks like that's what they're talking about. It's got the Pro controller, it's got the Joy-Cons and all kinds of configurations, including a configuration like this, and one like that. I don't really know why it's like that. Maybe they were just trying to make a point, but that's out there. So these are all very different to the trademarked Nintendo 64 controller, which leads me to the idea that potentially they are building up to talking about that console and its mini incarnation. And the other thing that points me to this conclusion that it might be coming quite soon is that in the E3 presentation for Nintendo, they obviously spent a lot of time talking about Smash Bros. Ultimate, but one of the main themes is that they were displaying 64 characters that were going to be present in that game. Not really 64, because they announced Ridley right at the end, so there's going to be 65, but they made a big point of saying everybody's here, 64 characters. Just, beating back again that theme of 64. Now, I know Nintendo likes to go on about 64. They held that as a bragging right for the power of the console since way back in the day, and they still make jokes about that to this day, like when they did that whole Muppet thing with Reggie doing 64 push-ups.
Nintendo 63. Nintendo 64. My puppet body is ready.
So there is the idea that they could just be playing around with that number again, or they could be subliminally feeding us these little things. I've been looking out just for other little hints or giveaways that a console could be on its way. The reason I think that it hasn't been released just yet is they want to let the online service come out. That's the next immediate thing. They made it quite clear at E3 that they do have stuff happening in the background, and they're just talking about things that are happening right now. So instead of seeing a pre-Christmas release, which would make a lot of sense to me, but I think that we're going to see it maybe next year, maybe after they get through Smash Bros. Ultimate and everything like that, because a lot of the games on the Nintendo 64 are quite similar to what they are looking at releasing at the moment. I also have a feeling that we might be seeing Majora's Mask on the 3DS having a select release around Christmas time, maybe, just to drive a few more sales there. It's been sitting with the regular released copy for, 3 years now? and every other game in the Nintendo franchise that's on the 3DS has already had a Selects title released for it, except for, if you want to count Triforce Heroes, I don't count it. People might not be as inclined to pick up that game in the Selects version if they know that they could just get the console and get it there, so there might be a bit of a strategy from Nintendo's side to not release it straight away. But I think it's foolhardy not to release a Nintendo 64 Mini console. It makes a lot of sense. They could release it with just one controller for a similar price to what they did for the SNES Mini. You guys don't know, it's right there. I keep pointing at it because it's right off camera. That's why I keep looking at it. And it's like nodding back at me going, yep, egging me on. But they could release it with one controller for the same price, and then they could make the other controllers as additional items that you could purchase for, I don't know, the $20 to $40 range. Then I'm saying 20 for the United States currency, 40 for me. Why don't they do that? Which leads me on to the last thing I want to talk about on the subject before we move on to the Nintendo Online services, and that is, what games would we want to see on the Nintendo 64 Mini console? Now, I've got my own list as well. I'm going to read through these. This is a balance of what I'd like to see, what triggers nostalgia for me, as well as what Nintendo could put on there to give a nice balanced range of games. I tried to settle on 10 to be realistic and to get my hopes up so there'd be a couple of surprises if they ever did do it. This would be my key 10 to have. Couldn't settle on 10, so I went for 20. Even though we know that they are sort of progressively getting less. Maybe that's regressively getting less games on them from the NES, which had 30, SNES had 20, maybe only 15 for the Nintendo 64 Mini console, even though they could perfectly fit all of those games on. But here's my list. Now, don't get triggered if your games or your favourite games aren't on here, if I've missed out something that you really like. This is purely a list that I'd like to see. It's meant to trigger conversations. You're totally entitled to your wrong opinion. Alright, coming in number 1, even though, and this is one of those ones where I know Nintendo needs to do it for the fans. I never played this game, but Mario 64 would be the number 1 game that they need to have on there, because that's their, as much as I like Zelda, that's their flagship game. Ocarina of Time, that's what we started talking about with this whole thing. Ocarina of Time has to be on that console. Mario Kart is a given. That's taking number 3 place. Number 4 place, obviously, Smash Bros. Those are the party games. You have to have those on the console. That's what's going to drive people to buy additional controllers for it. And then I've got Donkey Kong 64. So Donkey Kong 64, it was showcasing the expansion pack. It was one of those games that was meant to be a big mover for the console towards the end of its life, and I think that it's one of those games that it needs to just be on there. It was great. 007, another party game, another seller for additional controllers. Gotta have 007 on it. This is where you run into a bit of a problem, because 007 and some of the other games on here were produced by Rare. Rare and Nintendo kind of went their separate ways, obviously. Now Rare is owned by Microsoft. However, Microsoft and Nintendo have been playing nicely recently. There's been a lot of good collaboration with their advertising around Fortnite. Making fun at PlayStation, of PlayStation's expense, but also, it's a good nurturing relationship. It's good to see, and potentially there could be some stuff happening behind the scenes when Nintendo is trying to work to get their rights back for this game. So following on from 007, Body Harvest. Body Harvest was a freaking amazing game. I was like, 10 or 11 when I was playing it, so I was probably a bit more mature than what I was ready for at the time, but Body Harvest, if you don't know, it's a game based on a genetically engineered superhuman from the future that goes to the past over the last 100 years to these 25 key points in the past where a comet comes past Earth and these aliens come and harvest bodies basically to fuel their war machine to go on and propagate their destruction of other worlds everywhere across the galaxy, and you are the one person who is bred to stop them. There was a whole army, but they destroyed their space station, and you're the one last guy that gets to go back. Basically like Halo with time travel, but you've got an open world game. You first go to like the 1910s Greece, then you go to 1930s Java. These are the major hotspots where it happens. Late 1940s America, and then Cold War Siberia or something like that. And each time there's different vehicles, different weapons, etc. It's great. The studio who made it, they went on to become Rockstar Studios. I don't know if you've heard of them. They've got some pretty good open world games. It all kind of starts here with Body Harvest, so it's a game you've got to check out. And it's really haunting and scary. Following Body Harvest, some light fun, Banjo-Kazooie. One of the rare games, I know, but we've got to get it back to sell the system. And maybe that's what's taking so long as well. There could be ongoing negotiations. Speculation again, but moving on. Pokemon Snap. 1080 snowboarding. Gotta have a sports game in there. 1080 snowboarding was amazing. Force Gemini. This was another rare game, but man, it was good. And it had a lot of content as well. That game was... The way I used to describe it was it's Zelda in space. But you also got to have multiple characters that you could switch between as well, so you'd have different types of weapon expertise, different level access as well, depending on which character you're playing with, and different sets of skills. Fucking great game. Pokémon Stadium. Again, they could be holding this back because people who want that nostalgia of playing the original games, they could go for Pokémon Stadium on the Nintendo 64. That had, you know, well, it was all just RPG battles and mini games, but it's still a lot of fun. And it could fill the void that people need, rather than going for Pokemon Let's Go, Pikachu and Eevee. You'd be crazy to do that, but there will be people out there that are crazy. Perfect Dark is the next one. This is my number 13. Rogue Squadron is my number 14. Number 15, and this is where I was trying to finish my list, so this is Majora's Mask. It's a given that game has to be on there. I think a lot of people missed out on playing that on the Nintendo 64. Hopefully they picked up one of the sort of 3 additional ways of buying it since then, but if you haven't, bringing back this on the 64 Mini console, gotta happen. Alright, these last 5 were kind of going to be just honourable mentions, but I'm just, so take them that way. If we're only going to get 15, these are just honourable mentions, but I think it's really key that they do make their way on, because a lot of them are Nintendo flagship games. The other ones just are games that people would want to play. So we've got Blast Corps, great game. Yoshi Story, never played it. Star Fox 64, Episode 1 Racer, a Star Wars game based on Episode 1, but the best part of Episode 1, that's a really good racing game. It was a big toss-up between this and F-Zero. Never played F-Zero, but I spent countless hours playing Episode 1 Racer. We used to rent it from Blockbuster, and yeah, we rented that one a lot. We probably could have bought it towards the end of it, but and the last one, number 20, a controversial Conker's Bad Fur Day. I don't know if that will be very good for the kids, but let's face it, Nintendo 64 Mini Console isn't for the kids. It's for the 30-year-olds out there like myself who just want to visit the past. Right, so that's all for that subject. Let me know what you think about my picks in the comments down below. What you'd like to see as well. I'd be interested to hear that, and whether or not you feel like it's coming soon. I think we might hear something about it once we get past this online service, and once we get past this holiday period, it might be the next big thing. So the next thing I want to talk about is the online service, which launches sometime this month. We don't get any more particular detail than that. Potentially by the time this video comes out, it's already launched and all of my questions will be answered, in which case maybe I'll just cut the video off here. But the main thing I want to talk about with this is, and this is something that's been really unclear to me, is the games that you get to play, the NES games at the moment, and potentially the SNES games, and maybe even Nintendo 64 games in the future, how is that library going to work? Because it looks like you would need to be online to play them. It looks like there's a lot of augmentation to the game that requires online. There's a multiplayer, which apparently is you can watch your friends play Zelda or Mario, or you can pass the controller to them, which could be why we see the controller configuration like this. I'm interested to know, because Nintendo is really focused on this, the fact that the Switch, and we've spoken about this before, can be taken anywhere, played anywhere, and it's meant to fit in and suit your lifestyle. So what if your lifestyle is that you want to play NES games while you're on the train? Is the online service going to give you, like with Netflix, a download option that lets you maybe hold 1 or 2 titles on your console that you can just play wherever you are, and the other ones, if you want to play the augmented features, if you want to play other games that you haven't got slots for, you have to be online to play? Or is the online service going to be for that level of sort of pro gamer that you can't access it unless you have a connection like you would with your PS4s or your Xbox Ones? I don't know the answer. I think it's kind of dumb if it is going to be that. I think you need to have the option to have 1 or 2 games sitting on your console that you can access when offline. That just makes sense to me. The other thing I want to talk about the online service, and this is kind of just a more of a rant or a bitch from me, is the fact that you're going to need to, it looks like at this stage, you're going to need to have the online service to play, to trade in Pokemon Let's Go. And potentially in the future Pokemon game, which is allegedly still coming next year. That makes absolutely no sense to me. So Pokemon is a game that's already got a pay gap between you getting your certificate for catching 150 Pokemon or 700 Pokemon or however many Pokemon it is. That gap is you need to have another friend, a link cable, Wi-Fi connection, somebody else with the game, or your own copy of the game, like, let's be honest, most of us do, so that you can trade Pokemon between your two games and get them all. That's if you want to be a master. So already you've got this gap between you reaching that, and now they're putting another gate or another barricade in the way in which you need to have an online service. I know it's really cheap, I really appreciate that, Nintendo, but why do we need that for trading Pokemon? That's utterly ridiculous. I can understand putting it on for racing on Mario Kart with people online. I think that there was a smarter way to do this than what you've gone for. And I understand that that's the way that the industry is moving. But again, you, Nintendo, I'm talking to you directly, I know you'll never see this, you are the company that's out there challenging those standards. Sometimes those challenges are really good. They're innovative, portable, next-gen consoles that we can all get behind and really enjoy. Other times it's having a application on your cell phone for voice chat, which I haven't used, but looks very tedious and painful. But yeah, I think with that you have to take the good with the bad, and there is a lot more good outweighing the bad coming with this new update and with the online service. Cloud save sounds amazing, and there are some other goodies in there that I'm looking forward to checking out how they work. Obviously this is just the 1.0 of what the online service will eventually become, so I am excited and concerned. I'll keep an eye on it. Might let you know what I think about it next week if it's launched already. But that wraps up the show for today, so thank you for dropping by, thank you for listening to my speculation, my wild speculation, based on nothing really, so I can't really call this news too much, but if you enjoyed it, chuck a like up there. If you want to see more, subscribe, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.